Today, Governor Lowe and the Reserve Board met and they kept the cash rate on hold once again in May. That keeps the cash rate at 1.5%. So monetary policy remains on hold. But we now come into the month of federal budgets and state budgets. And this is where we start to look at fiscal policy. So what are our state governments and also our federal government going to do about stimulating the economy moving forward? Because there's no doubt the economy absolutely needs a little bit more of a kick on. If you actually see the RBA minutes of last month, they were concerned about the sluggishness in the domestic economy. We've seen, and we continue to keep looking at unemployment, sitting at around 5.9%. Now, what that actually means is where they're concerned is around the spare capacity. We've talked about this before. So we're seeing around 1 million people who aren't working at their full capacity, and that's exactly the role of what monetary policy is about. Now let's come back to the federal budget. The federal and state budgets are going to be factoring in some infrastructure movements, and we're going to see the federal government try and position this argument between good and bad debt. So spending our taxpayers' money on what is going to stimulate the economy and what's good for the long-term return, as opposed to maybe some spending that's not giving us that return. So we're seeing definitely some stimulation in infrastructure. We're going to see obviously some money still set aside for education and training, and we're also going to see some money for health. So that's good things. Now, on the other side of it, we're also going to be talking about housing affordability. Now, this is my big message, so I'm going to come back to that in a moment. I also want to look globally to see what's basically happened in the last month. So we've seen the US stock market rally quite considerably to record high levels. Now, this is on the back of proposed tax cuts and also on planned big infrastructure spending. So the markets like that because they can see all of that capital flowing back into the US economy. The Chinese economy continues to surprise on the upside, with GDP numbers still above 6%. Now that means that, again, part of what's happening in terms of the central federal government in China, what they're trying to do is working for them in terms of trying to get that domestic economy moving stronger and stronger and spending. They've also have done some things around housing values over there, which I think is smart because you can also get into a bubble environment over there. So they're starting to cap some areas around housing. I think that's sensible. Then we go to Europe. We've seen obviously the French elections to elect a new president. We've seen round one of that. And the markets also like that because we didn't see that sort of internal socialist far right type play coming in, and far left, the two areas where they're not necessarily open to global trade and so forth. Well, they didn't get up. So you would like to think that we're going to see France continuing in the EU, and that was positive for the markets. We also saw in the UK, the Prime Minister there, Theresa May, look to announce a snap election so she can work on her Brexit program to get the UK out of the European Union. So lots going on, but enough sort of stabilisation to see the markets generally around the world doing okay. So it is still back here in Australia that poses our biggest problem. So we've had this construction boom, which has led to terrific numbers. And in fact, in all honesty, we would be in a recession if it wasn't for this construction-led recovery after the mining boom. We are still failing to see, though, businesses invest in their businesses to grow the economy and to borrow money. And that's why the monetary policy piece is still a struggle for the RBA. So even though the cash rate's been on hold, when we look at our own households, what's actually been happening is we've been charged more. So we've seen a couple of rate rises outside of the RBA cycle. Now, we anticipated that, and we've mentioned that too before, and I don't think that's going to stop. And it all comes back to the property market and the values of properties growing too quickly. There have been reports by the OECD when they've looked at property booms and busts, is that a lot of them, almost 60% of them, end in recession. So it's really important in terms of how careful the government changes these macroprudential regulations. If they hit it with a sledgehammer like Labor's proposing, then that's definitely going to affect house prices. So what they're doing is they're trying to do it strategically through APRA, and we've talked about this before. And there's three things they're really trying to focus on. The first thing they looked at was serviceability. So they're trying to stop the amount of lending happening, especially to investors in the market. So they've tightened up or put a higher buffer on servicing, which means that borrowers can't borrow as much money as what they were in the past. That's a good thing. They've also looked at interest-only loans. So even though our clients know that we've been very bullish on interest-only lending in the past, including for our principal home, there are people out in the marketplace that are using interest-only functions in the wrong way. In other words, they're buying their new family home, stretching their family budgets too high to try and get that family home and not factoring in the ability to pay that mortgage back. So that's going to put pressure on those people buying those properties at those higher ends. So sensible to see some type of tapering for interest-only lending. If you do have interest-only lending on your own borrowings and have an offset attached to that, then it's going to be a case-by-case basis. So we're asking you as our clients to come and talk to our mortgage advisors again to have a review of your current situation, because it's going to come down to case by case. We're a big believer in keeping money in offsets and you being in control of liquidity, but it's really important to get that review done. So if you haven't had a review in the last 18 months, then we encourage you to reconnect with us, update your financial status in your fact find, and then talk to one of our brokers, and we'll be able to review that to see what your best option is. Now, coming back to the third thing that they're looking to do, or the third thing, serviceability. So they're trying to reduce that serviceability and also responsible lending guidelines. So ASIC's also getting involved, making sure the banks are actually lending responsibly. So all these things are just about taking layer upon layer out of the property market to slow the demand side down. And we think that that is prudent, because as again, if we did see a big correction in the property market, we would see less general spending. The wealth effect, well, people will basically be conservative. They'll stop spending in retail, and that will see further job losses in the retail sector and potentially take the economy into a recession, which is obviously not what we want. So it's an important time. Everything is going to be placed on Scott Morrison's May budget that's coming out in the next couple of weeks, and I'll talk more to that in next month's review. But for right now, the message here today is it's time for a review of your financials. So make sure you reach out to your professional, or if you're an Empower Wealth client, make sure you reach out to one of our team here and get a review on your current situation, and we'll design a tailored solution for you. Thanks for watching.